Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 60th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turvin, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing in this lovely, lovely evening, good sir?
I'm doing good, man. It's a Monday.
Yeah?
And went through a day of work. Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I'm doing just fine. I'm ready to play some games, ready to talk about some games. What about you, Ryan? How are you doing?
Well, I'm just looking outside. It's a clear night out tonight in Toronto. It's a little bit humid, a little bit hot.
What?
It's like 22 degrees.
Are you a
outside.
weatherman now?
I could be. I mean, I'm the weatherman on the boost. So, actually,
I can tell you every day the weather in the Bay Area. It's a moderate 70 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, no humidity, a light breeze, light jacket. That's every day.
I hate you so much. That sounds too good to be true, Garret. But anyways, this is the RPG Cave where we talk about RPGs all the time, except for right now we're talking about the weather. So folks at home,
Yes,
if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that as I smoothly transition to clearing the dungeon of those pesky mobs, because we want to get right to the raid boss, because we got some stuff to talk about tonight. So if you're watching right now on youtube.com/carpoolgaming, you have one really awesome job. If you'd like to, make sure to hit like on the live stream. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already, and then ding, 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 ring that bell to be notified about any of our newest videos, or whenever we go live, like the live stream we're doing tonight, or let us know in the comments below. Tell us what some of your favorite forgotten RPGs are, or RPG hidden gems. We want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments. And trust me, a lot of people tonight had a lot of things to say about forgotten RPGs. So if you didn't submit a question, feel free to let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. Also, you can subscribe to us on your audio podcast feed of choice, whether, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, run all the things. So check us out there wherever pods are caught. Also, if you want this podcast a little bit early or some exclusive content like some upcoming movie geek out episodes that might be coming later this week with myself and Sean, head on over to patreon.com/carpoolgaming, just like our newest ultimate producer, Robby Miller, who went over there and got himself some sweet merch. So huge thank you to Robby Miller for becoming an ultimate producer over at Carpool Gaming, which is awesome. I mean, Robby Miller has been a patron for a long time, but he finally upgraded to the ultimate producer level. And then last but not least, reminder as well, we also have a new patron, Haley Miller, as well. I forgot that as well. Thank you for reminding me in the chat, John.
Nice.
Last but not least, if you want a cool RPG Cave t-shirt like the one Garret is wearing right now, even though you can't see it in the way this video is cropped, there you go. Way to show it off for the crowd. And then over to our merch store, bit.ly/CPG merch, and snag one for yourself. Well, without further ado, Garret, let's read from the secret text. And tonight's secret text, is unusually dusty tonight, Garret. We had to dust off the tomes tonight. We had to
literally a broom.
Yeah, we had to get rid of all the cobwebs. Yeah, because tonight we are talking about all of the RPGs that time forgot, aka forgotten RPGs. So these are RPGs that we feel people just don't talk about anymore, that are worthwhile games to check out. And Garret and I compiled a list. And also, huge thank you to our listeners as well, because this topic was suggested by you, as I hit my microphone, the RPG Cave community. Thank you so much for submitting tonight's topic via our RPG Cave survey. I feel like we might have to do one of the surveys again, probably in the next couple months, Garret, to get some more feedback.
Get more ideas going, for sure.
We've been getting some good feedback. Good topic suggestions from the community, including tonight's topic, which, as I can tell by looking through all the listener responses tonight, a topic y'all are very passionate about talking about. So I'm very glad we were able to do this for you tonight. So again, some of these games you might have heard of, but again, you might have just been like, oh yeah, that's that one game that I may have played maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And some of these, I think there's a real chance that there's going to be people who haven't heard of any of these games that we're going to talk about tonight.
No, definitely true. You probably heard all of my RPGs that I'm going to go through, and you may know 1 or 2 from Ryan's list.
I'm not going to lie. I may have flexed my Archmage skills a little bit tonight, Garret, putting my list together. In fact, my list is so big, I've got a list of 10 games, and I mean, that was just me cutting it off at 10 games. So 5 normal games and then 5 honorable mentions. So there's a lot to get through. So Garrett, are you ready to
Yes.
jump into this?
Sure. So, before I get into this, I was talking to Ryan earlier today. I even just throughout the week, just kind of struggling about the subject because, the subject is forgotten RPGs. Of course, I'm going to forget about these RPGs. So I'm going to have to reel it in, look back into my backlogs. I grabbed my Vita, my OLED Vita out. I grabbed my 3DS out as well. Just sifting through the libraries. What am I forgetting? And I scrounged some video games out of there. I'm also thinking of some other as well that are more current consoles. I don't think I have a game particularly before 2010. How about that? So I'm more recent role playing games. The first one I'm going to mention is actually a game that I mentioned before in the RPG Cave episode series. And you haven't heard about this game when I mentioned it to you, but I want to speak this out again because it's on sale right now on PS4 and it's the most recent one. It is Zenki Zero developed by Spike Chunsoft. I feel like this game was released worldwide in 2019, and after a month, no one's talking about it at all. And I think that's a lot with like a lot of, I guess, Japanese focused role playing games where they come out in like somewhere else. And if they're not Final Fantasy, if they're not Tales games or anything related to that, then they're going to go by off the wayside and not to be heard of ever again. And then you creep onto those sales and like, is that game good? And it's like, it's kind of good. So Zenki Zero is a first person dungeon crawler with a unique setting of being immediately like 20 years into the future or something like that. It's like tens of years into the future in Japan. Global warming and climate change has happened, flooded the whole Japan island, basically. And so you're in this kind of desolate island with a few other characters, and Spike Chunsoft does what they do best is writing. They do a bunch of character development, story-driven type of tropes, and it's pretty good. I think its mechanics are especially interesting for a first-person dungeon crawler. You go tile by tile, and then monsters kind of like every time you turn a tile, it also moves. So it's like just turn-based in a way like that. And also like the characters themselves age rapidly because they're clones of themselves actually. So they age up, and then depending on what age they develop skills in that age group. So think of an age group as like a class, and so there's like babies, literally babies, teenagers, adults, and old people. Like no joke, it's 4 different classes, and they just rotate out throughout each character. It's a very weird system, but it works for this game. I just feel like no one just talks about this anymore. It is $12 USD right now over on the PSN store. So go check out Zenki Zero because I think it's an awesome story. Yeah, overall.
It definitely sounds like a Spike Chunsoft game when you kind of describe it that way, as far as the style of games that I expect from them. And yeah, like I know at the time when you had mentioned it, when we were talking about it, a long time ago, I remember it kind of being a turnoff for me because I wasn't, super into, first person RPGs, but, I have, they've grown on me at least a little bit more since the last time we talked about it, especially after last week's episode and, doing research for that episode. I was like, I got into a little bit more of these types of games. So yeah, I think maybe that's one to check out, especially for that price. Like, how can you really beat $12 American? Although that's probably like good. 30 Canadian dollars when you do the conversion.
Somewhere around there, yes.
But still, I still think maybe that's a game I should check out at some point because it sounds pretty cool. Anyways, and I know that again, Spike Chunsoft does awesome stories that and they're never afraid to do weird and wacky stuff too, which is one of the
very wacky stuff for sure. Yes,
nice. Sounds like fun. But next up, I'm gonna talk about a game that probably out of all the games on my list, except for maybe one or two, because I know Seth Sturgill's in the chat, and I know he's heard of one of my other ones. This is one of the other ones that I think people have probably heard of. So I'm going to talk about a PSP game. Now, you know me, on the show, I've talked a lot about PSP RPGs, because I actually think the PlayStation Portable was like a really fantastic console for RPGs. And a lot of these are available on Vita as well. So if you're actually
Mhm.
interested in picking a lot of these up, you can actually go to the Vita store while it's still open, and you can actually purchase some of these PSP games on there, including today's game, the one that I want to talk about right now, and that is Jeanne d'Arc. I think I may have talked about this once or twice on the show
Mhm.
before, but this is from Level 5, and it was released on August 21st,
Oh, really?
2007 in North America, and it is a weird anime fantasy version of the story of Jeanne d'Arc, or Joan of Arc, essentially, where you play as Joan of Arc. She's hearing, with the voice of God, telling her to go on this giant crusade to basically destroy these, like, demons that have taken over France.
Nice.
So it's like a really awesome, like, strategy RPG from Level 5. It plays beautifully. It has these amazing, like, anime cutscenes as well that help set the story. And this was a game that I know a lot of people talked about when it came out, but then, like, no one talks about this game anymore, and it's never come to any of the platforms. Like, it's stuck on the PSP. And in fact, with my list tonight, you're going to see a lot of games that are, like, stuck on the consoles that they're on, and that's why I think a lot of people kind of missed out on a lot of these games. But Jeanne d'Arc in particular, it's a game that I think is critically underplayed, and, like, you can get it on Vita right now, I think for, like, 10 or $20 on the PlayStation Store.
That's not bad.
It's definitely worth checking out. Or, again, if you've got a PSP, like, even the physical version, like this one, goes for pretty cheap as well. I've had this one. It's got, like, the markings of my old, EB game sticker that was on it, because this is my copy I got a long time ago when it first came out. And it was a game that I played to death on my PSP. So Jeanne d'Arc, excellent game.
Nice.
I highly recommend it, especially if you like strategy RPGs, and especially if you like Level 5 games as well. Like, I think you're going to really dig Jeanne d'Arc as well. So definitely check it out.
So is it like, do you have a party of units for this strategy RPG? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
she's, like, leading a bunch of knights into battle with her to take down these demons. But she starts not as, like, a knight, but as, like, almost like a villager, and then she kind of works her way throughout her journey to become, like, this, like, really fierce and powerful knight throughout the story. So yeah, I love the power progression too, because it has, like, a really good leveling system for all the characters, a great class system, and yeah, it's just really fun to play.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, and I'm looking up Level 5. What are they known for?
So they're known for the Professor Layton series, as well as
Professor Layton. That's what I was thinking. And Ni no Kuni.
Yeah, Ni no Kuni as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. I've just heard, like, sometimes these studios names, like, intermix in my mind, and I completely forget where they come from. And Level 5 is one of them that I'm just like, where did they come from? I totally forgot.
Yeah.
So,
also, I think we
nice,
talked
dude.
about them not too long ago, because Seth in the chat brings up Dark Cloud, and I remember we got a question about Dark Cloud about a month or two back, and that was them as well. So Dark Cloud 1 and 2 on PlayStation 2. So,
Yes, they did Dark Cloud for sure.
yeah.
They only did Dark Cloud 1, I guess, not 2.
Yeah. We actually, again, had, like, some people ask us to do a Level 5 episode, so we should definitely do that at some point.
For sure.
But Jeanne d'Arc, one of my favorite games from them. I actually think it's a really good game. It's up there with Ni no Kuni as, like, probably my 2 favorite games from Level 5. But
Ni no Kuni, I played the first one on Switch. It's so cool.
Yeah.
So good.
The first one, the second one's okay, but the first Ni no Kuni, just chef's kiss. That game's awesome.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. All right, Garrett.
Okay.
Hit me with another one.
Okay, I'm not going to just hit you with one game. I'm going to hit you with 5 games.
What?
Or actually, maybe like 2 or 3 games. I don't know. A series of games that I think will be stuck on the DS/3DS until the rest of the time. I don't think these games will ever be ported or whatever, which is sad because these games are awesome. And it's the Etrian Odyssey series. I mentioned these games before, but they are another first-person dungeon crawler. I can't believe it. I didn't actually put those 2 and 2 together.
I'm sensing a theme.
But yeah, it's a dungeon crawler. Yeah. Tile-based, but then you do turn-based combat in this game compared to Zenki Zero. And you go through with a bunch of your units and classes. And what I love about this series, the novelty behind it, is discovering each floor in the dungeon. And you have to draw individual squares and boundaries, just like, the Persona Q series, very similar. You go throughout the DS, and then you just figure out all the little obstacles that are going around through this dungeon, and you figure out there's a lot of customization in these games with classes and leveling up, and then the formation actually as well in the combat is pretty intricate. But yeah, man, like I think these games are just not gonna be ported forward ever,
Mhm.
because the way the touchscreen is handled on the DS, it's so easy to just go through a dungeon and having that bottom screen as your reference, as your map. It would be, you could do it in like a Switch fashion, but you couldn't like there's some interactivity with it,
Mhm.
by having that stylus, going and putting individual like symbols on these tiles to make your map. And I get addicted throughout these games because I want to know every single tile. I want to know exactly where the obstacles are going, what are the boundaries. So yeah, I think these games are not talked about enough. And then now that they're gonna be pretty much forgotten. Whereas I feel like a lot of other 3DS RPGs are they're being talked about. They're having sequels. They may have a port to Switch, but the Etrian Odyssey series, I think, is done. The developers kind of moved on and making new games as well. But yeah, that's what I want to mention is those games. So,
Yeah.
what do you think?
And actually, like, kind of in the same boat, like I would lump, Persona Q 1 and 2 in there as well. Like, I don't think
Yeah,
any of those games, like that, like bucket of games, that is in that style, just come to any other platforms ever. Like, I think they're going to be stuck
yeah,
on 3DS and DS forever because we don't have a successor to the 3DS at all. Like, it would have probably
hmm
been possible if like the Switch was like a Wii U style concept where you could play a game, like a developer could create a game that would play on the TV and the Switch at the same time. But because
hmm
that's not, we don't have a system that's able to really do that. I think a lot of these games are just going to stay there forever, and you'd be lost to time, which is too bad, especially with the 3DS store closing soon. Especially with Etrian
yeah.
Odyssey games in particular, because we've talked about it on the show before, but like the physical copies of those games are becoming more and more expensive, like every
They're
day.
getting up there. Yeah,
And I remember them
no
being on
joke.
sale for $5 each on the
They were
eShop.
so cheap.
Because
Yeah,
Atlas did a big, kind of fire sale when they announced the closure of the store, and I managed to snag them then. But like, if you didn't, like, you'll probably never be able to check these games out in like a inexpensive fashion at this point. Like, they're gonna be kind of
right.
lost to time, I think. Like 10 years from now, I don't even know if people will even remember these games in particular.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
But especially
good
too, 'cause,
line of
like,
forgotten RPGs.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, first person dungeon crawling, we talked about it on the dungeon crawling episode, but it's just like, that genre in particular is very niche as it is. And then,
It is pretty niche.
when you stick it on the 3DS and then, yeah, like while it probably makes more sense to play it that way, I think you're not even hitting the target audience for that type of game anyway. So it's like a harder sale and just makes it,
You're kind of pigeonholed.
yeah, you're just making the audience just even smaller for that type of game, which is why I just think people totally missed out on those games, in myself included. Like, I didn't even realize
hmm
that these games were fun or worth playing, when they were coming out. So I even missed the boat on them. But
Yeah,
I'm glad you were here to tell me about them so that I could snag them now
they're so good.
before, I still could. Because here's your reminder once again, that you can't actually add any more money to your account anymore. Because I think that, stopped last week, but make sure to buy those 3DS games while you still can before, the shutdown early next year.
I think it's like what 2 weeks or something like that until the store closes, or what? When does the store close
So
for
the
the
store
3DS?
itself doesn't stop until next year, but you can't add any
Okay.
money anymore. So whatever money is on your account currently, you can't
hmm
you can pay
Yeah,
for.
March 2023 is when it's gonna close.
Yeah,
Okay.
but you can't. But
So
if you didn't add gift cards already, you can't really add any money to your account at this point. So you're kind of stuck at this
that
point.
kind of sucks.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of expensive games or games on
Oh
consoles
no.
that will probably never, ever, ever come back due to a whole myriad of reasons, I will forewarn everyone that the list I'm about to give you of 4 games before I get to my honorable mentions are all very expensive. So just FYI, there are other ways, of course, of playing these games, but they are very, very, very expensive. And there's a reason why I don't have like a pile of games sitting on my desk here to show you, because I don't actually currently have a lot of these games in my possession. So just FYI about a lot of these games I'm about to talk about. So you're in a sense a theme here. So I'm going to start with Dark Wizard on the Sega CD. Now, Garrett, I was racking my brain because I knew I wanted to include a Sega CD game here. And I know that,
Of course.
you know me, I've talked about the Sega CD to death. Like, believe it or not, that console was actually pretty good for RPGs. Yes, there weren't a ton of them, but there were a lot of really good quality RPGs on the Sega CD in particular. And Dark Wizard was definitely one of them. And it's one that I wanted to include here because I've never talked about it on the show before. And Garrett had no idea what this game even was before I even sent him my list, because we normally don't share our list with each other. But tonight we decided, to share a little bit of our picks with each other to kind of, get like enlighten ourselves at least a little bit on some of these games. So Dark Wizard was developed and published by Sega and released in 1994 in North America. It was directed by Final Fantasy 1 through 3 writer Kenji Terada. So he was like kind of the visionary behind this. He actually was the lead writer though on the first 3 Final Fantasy games, and then he was actually hired by Sega from Square at the time. Cool. And he was working on a bunch of their games, and this was one of them as well. And this is actually a hexagonal-based strategy RPG, also very anime heavy. Again, that's going to be probably a theme from my list, so heads up about that as well. Again, it's a Ryan Turford list. What do you expect? But what was cool about this game, or what I really liked about it, was a couple things. Number one, you actually get to select from one of 4 different protagonists at the start of the story, and they're kind of your army's leader. Because it is a strategy RPG. Oh, nice. So you have like a hero character and then a bunch of, lower level characters that aren't really like heroes themselves. They're more like almost like, real-time strategy units. Like you have some mix of monsters and soldiers as well, which is kind of cool. But the way the game starts is that depending on what hero you select, there will be a different cutscene at the beginning of the game, because this game was a Sega CD game, so it had like fully animated cutscenes. And depending on what protagonist you had a different start to the game. So, for example, one of the wizards named Crystal, like she, finds out her parents are murdered, and it was she finds out that this king ordered their murder, so she has teleportation magic, so she teleports into his throne room, and she's like, I'm gonna take revenge for my parents, and she like electrocutes them to death. It's like a really violent scene in this game, but then suddenly, after she murders the king, she is told that the king actually had nothing to do with her parents' death, and she was actually tricked into it by the real culprit of the crime. So she vows revenge against the person that kind of set her up like this. So she basically has this giant army, and you go on these like hexagonal maps. So similar to something like Civilization, where instead of having the squares on your map, it's more like bigger hexagon shaped tiles. And likewise on the tiles, you'll have different fortresses and a bunch of different units, and the units have different strengths and weaknesses against other units. Like flying units are better against ground units. But then there's also artillery units, and there's like a lot of depth to this game. Like it's very difficult as well. Like it's not an easy game to play. But you can play it on easy mode, and you will actually probably be able to get through it if you've been able to play, other strategy RPGs. But I really like this one. I think it's definitely a standout. It's definitely very different from a lot of other strategy RPGs that are out there that are more like hero-based, like something like Fire Emblem, where you have a bunch of named units that you're really following the story of. Whereas this one, you're kind of playing, a ruler of a nation, and then you're taking the army, you're battling armies of like 2 different nations against each other. So, Dark Wizard, really, really, really underrated game. And a game from Sega that I just think we'll never, ever see ever again, unless they put it on the Sega Genesis Mini 2, which is coming out later this year, which I hope they do. Like, this is another one of the Sega CD games I would love to see on there that they haven't announced yet. It's up there with Snatcher as one of the other ones that I really want to see come to that console. So, there you go. A game you've probably never heard of before in Dark Wizard. What do you think, Garrett?
Well, when I searched this game up, I just put in a Dark Wizard on good old Google. Actually, I have Bing as my default search, so it was Bing. So maybe Bing was stupid, but never cat the game. It was just Dark Wizard. You mean Harry Potter? Oh, you mean Lord of the Rings, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, no, I mean the video game. Oh yeah, that happened. It was a Sega game way back in the day, and so I checked out some gameplay of this. Um, it was actually kind of cool to
Mhm.
see. It looked like a old school, like more like a Civ game,
Yeah.
but it's a strategy role playing game instead of like this over like arching like turn based Civ game. It looked really neat to play. It looked like, as you said, there's many different units compared to Fire Emblem, and there's a lot of Fog of War
Yeah.
actually in this game too, which is we see that sometimes in strategy role playing games, but not so much anymore.
Mhm.
To be honest with you, like Fog of War changes the game a lot in strategy role playing games. I used to play that in real time strategy as well. I played that all the time with Red Alert and Age of Empires. That Fog of War can really change the ways. Like I don't know where the units are, and this one looked really similar where you had these units scoping out like different areas in the map and
Mhm.
figuring out where all the enemies were and the structures and everything
Like the
like that.
flying
So
units
it
in
looked
particular,
cool.
like since they can move so far, you usually want to have them scout some of the areas first, and then while your
Hmm.
troops are a little bit slower, they can then kind of march in while you're scouting out some of the areas. Like it's really cool how they put that together.
Hmm. So I mean, this is one of the few retro games where I'm like, I kind of want to play this. I kind of want to get back into it, like this particular one because it looks so cool to play. So,
Mhm.
anyways,
Yeah. So,
um,
sh-
well, we'll see if I'll ever get to it.
yeah. I mean, just throw. But every time you come on here, Garrett, I just give you another game or two to just throw in the pile. It's fine. You'll get to them,
Just
in
just put it on the RPG pile
10 years from
over there.
now. Also, shout out to Blaze Knight in the chat, who has apparently played Dark Wizard. So there you go.
Oh, cool.
It's not as obscure
Nice.
as I thought it would, but definitely a forgotten RPG. Like again, I literally see no one ever talking about this game ever. Like even on like other RPG like YouTube channels and stuff like that. So there you go.
Hmm.
All right, Garrett,
Nice.
hit me with something else. What's your next game?
Okay, sure. Let's see here. What's my next one? Okay. This is actually a level 5 game as well. And that's why I was surprised you had a level 5 game. This one was on the 3DS, came out in 2014, and that is Fantasy Life. Ever heard of this one?
I've heard of the name, but I can't recall
Yes.
literally anything about it.
Yes,
So
I
enlighten
think
me.
everyone is in your boat. Everyone heard about this game. No one played it though. It just came into the 3DS and it's just gone. Um, So this is a role playing game, kind of similar to, let's say, Rune Factory, and like this kind of more like open to life type of thing where you like take jobs and quests. Well, first off, you choose a job, whether it's a wizard or a mercenary or whatever, and it's this cutesy little town, and then you just go off and do a bunch of different quests, and you kind of level up your job, and then you can take in more characters to do different jobs. And so it's just an overall just a cute game that was on the 3DS. I played it years ago, like I don't know, like 8 years back. And
Mhm.
so I was trying to revisit it a little bit on my 3DS, and I'm like, oh, yep, I remember this. This was actually kind of fun. I don't think anyone like I think in 3DS what overshadows it is like Fire Emblem, you know, all the other role playing games. That Bravely Default is a big one that everyone keeps talking about, which I was surprised. But no one just mentions Fantasy Life.
Mhm.
And I heard, and it's a special little gem for sure when I played it. So yeah, there you go. That's my short description of Fantasy Life. Because again, I've forgotten all about this too
It has a
on
very
my
generic name.
3DS.
Like it seems very forgettable if you don't not looking at it or seeing the gameplay or anything like that. But yeah, you're right. Like that happened a lot with a lot of the DS and 3DS games where there were a lot of RPGs that came out, but a lot of them were either had a lot of forgettable names or there was something forgettable about them. Where in theory we could have probably have done like an entire list of just 3DS and DS games that people forgot
Yeah,
about. In fact, I've
no
got
joke.
another one on my list when we get to that one, which is already in the thumbnail.
Oh
So
no.
it's already been spoiled for you. But yeah, I again, the fact that you brought the, Fantasy Life, and again, as soon as he said the name, I remembered the name and remember hearing about this game. But again, I can't recall for the life of me literally anything about this, like what it looks like or how it plays or literally anything about
Well, I remember playing it and I'm like, is anyone else like heard of this game? Like, no one else is playing it. Everyone else is playing Fire Emblem, Pokemon, whatever. But like, I mean, I was just literally the only one on my friends group that was playing Fantasy Life.
Ooh.
Everyone else was playing like Bravely Default or whatever. So yeah, this is one of the few, one of the few forgotten RPGs in that system.
God.
Fantasy Life was it's not a deep RPG. It's very cute. It's very like you do a bunch of different like classes, like mercenary, wizard, and there's like 10 different jobs to do in this game. And it's just overall just like kind of this go around, and it's a little bit more fetch questy, but it's super fun altogether. It has a cute vibe to it.
Yeah. And even when I just Googled it now, I'm looking at some of the screenshots and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, this is not bringing back any memories. Like it was probably in a Nintendo Direct at one point, or an E3 presentation. I don't remember anything about this. But and what's crazier too is like Uematsu did the soundtrack for this. Nintendo published this game, and yet
Nintendo published this game,
and yet no one's heard of it. And I just don't think I think Seth mentions in the chat as well that Nintendo was pushing this game hard, and nope, it just was no dice with people.
I think they pushed it hard and it just stopped. Like no one just heard of it after that. So I guess they, kind of dropped it.
Nice. Well,
there you go.
Moving on. I have a licensed game on this list. And not the licensed game you're thinking of, Garrett. A different licensed game.
Okay.
So this one is, believe it or not, probably the most expensive game on my list as far as if you want to actually buy this game today, because it's on the Sega Saturn. And if anyone who knows anything about Sega Saturn collecting, it's very expensive, and I don't recommend getting into it as someone who collects Sega Saturn games. But this is one that I think is a highlight for the console, and it's one that I hear people talk about or talked about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but I haven't heard a peep about it since, because I just think that, the Sega Saturn player base has, dwindled so much that people don't really talk about Sega Saturn too much. But if you're going to collect one Sega Saturn game and you're going to go all out and buy this game, because this game goes for like $1,000 minimum US.
Goodness.
We're talking about Magic Knight Rayearth. This is a licensed game. This is based off an anime from the Japan.
It's based off an anime.
So it was developed and published by Sega, and was released on November 30th, 1998 in North America by Working Designs. So that's key. Remember all the way back to episode 3 I talked all about Working Designs and, how they were kind of at the forefront for, really great, localizations in North America, and really one of the first like big, third party companies that handled localization for companies, for JRPGs in particular. So any of their games that they publish, you usually know that the quality's there, and Magic Knight Rayearth is a quality game. Like, it's a lot of fun to play. It's an action RPG where you control one of 3 characters, because this show is based around 3 different characters with magical powers, and they have different magical abilities. So the way it works with this game is during the gameplay, you can select between one of the 3 main characters, and depending on which character you select, you can then travel through the environment through certain ways. Like sometimes there's some platforming to do, so you need to select, one of the particular characters that's good at platforming or that can hover, and then you have a combat focused one. So there's a lot of strategy and depth to the gameplay, and just whether it's the combat or the traversal, it's really engaging. It's got like a really beautiful score. It's got some fantastic cinematics with voice acting from the show, and it's just nice. Like a really good licensed game with some great writing. And I mean, it has like a really great pedigree behind it, because a lot of people who worked on Phantasy Star 4, which is one of the best role-playing games on the Sega Genesis, and I think one of the best RPGs of the 16-bit era, was also worked on the same. Like, this was the game they worked on after Phantasy Star 4, including the director, Reiko Kodama, and this was like his second and only game that he ever directed was Magic Knight Rayearth, and he works today at Sega doing a bunch of publishing for a bunch of games, like as a producer. But this is kind of his last shot as a director was this game. So Magic Knight Rayearth is a game that, again, I think a lot of people just missed out on because it's on the Sega Saturn, because it's hard to get because it was a working designs game in North America, which just means that it had a very low print run in North America in particular. In theory, you could snag like a Japanese copy of it if you can read Japanese, or if you have, the ability to translate it. But man, this game's great. And if you like anime at all, I recommend, eventually finding a way to play it. There's a lot of fan translations online, so there are definitely accessible ways to play it, even if you don't have a Sega Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
But just had to include it on this list here because it's a game that I know, again, a lot more people talked about this 5 or 6 years ago, but it's been a very long time since I've heard anyone talk about Magic Knight Rayearth, and it needed to be said here. So there you go.
Wow. When I read this name, I had another game. I was like, all right, this isn't, I don't know what this is. Let me look this up. And yep, it was based off of a manga series. That was like kind of the first thing that popped up in the search is the manga series. And then looked into gameplay a little bit, and it's interesting. It's one of the few, well, I would say one of the few, but one of the good licensed games around that era. Did you play it when it was like released?
No, I actually didn't get a Sega Saturn until a couple years ago, but I currently don't have a physical copy of it because I ended up playing a fan translation online, Garrett, like a bad person. So,
oh well,
because I didn't have. Please, okay. I don't have $1,000 to go spend on this game.
Sega's not benefiting from that money.
No,
so
exactly. It'd be different if they still were. But yeah. Also, this is one of the reasons why, like, at some point, I would love for Sega to do a Sega Saturn Mini and throw this on there as well as a bunch of other games. Like, I think that's something I would love to see after they do like the Genesis Mini 2. Just like eventually they should of course do a Dreamcast one as well. But
okay, so how many minis do you want Sega to make out, like, compared to Nintendo? Do you want all the Nintendo minis, or are you just down for the Sega minis?
I'm just down for the Sega minis because honestly, a lot of the Sega games in particular are a little more out of reach than the Nintendo ones, if I'm being honest. Like, a lot of NES games, like I agree with you. I have an expensive NES game in my honorable mentions, but for the most part, like most of the NES and Super Nintendo games, are a little more easy to find in North America and not as expensive and as bad as the Saturn ones. So,
okay,
yeah, that's how I would put it. Garrett, I'm going to mute the stream. I will be right back and throw up the starting screen. So we'll be right back, folks.
Okay, sounds good.
And we're back. Sorry about that, folks. I just had to run and go do something. But we'll resume from here. So, Garrett, hit me with your next game. What do you got?
All right, this is my last one because it really I haven't gotten much forgotten role-playing games here, but I just want to shout this one out. I don't think this one gets enough like call out, I guess, and I think it was a pretty competent role-playing game, and that is the world of Final Fantasy.
Ooh.
That one came out originally like on the Vita in PS4, and I got it on Vita, and I thought it was really good when I played it on Vita. It played very similar to, let's say, a Pokemon game, where it's just a turn-based battle, and it's very cutesy, and it's just with all these Final Fantasy characters in a chibi fashion. I'm not a huge Final Fantasy fan, as you know, Ryan. So,
Of course.
but it was interesting that this one captured my attention. Maybe it was because it was just more cutesy, I guess. I don't know. Like, this really caught my. It was less obscure than Final Fantasy games. I don't know what's up with Final Fantasy games with me, but I find a lot of them just not really getting into my imagination, where this one did. And this one was actually, I was pretty enthralled by it. I really liked the combat. It had a different style to it for sure. It had this kind of like stacking of these different monsters onto one character and doing a huge attack to your enemies. So you had to figure that mechanic out. But overall, I really enjoyed my time with it on the Vita. But it's also on PS4. It's also on Xbox and actually on Steam. So it's not one of those games that's like trapped forever. And I think other people will enjoy this game. It's just, I think a lot of people just like saw this game as like, okay, it's another Final Fantasy side game, such as the other Final Fantasy side games, and just kind of just left it be. And it's like, all right, let's go back to Final Fantasy 7 Remake. Let's go back to 16. But I thought this one was actually really good, and especially on Vita. And let me tell you, it was way better than Final Fantasy X. You guys enjoying Final Fantasy X, I don't get you, but you're happy, so I'm glad you're happy.
I actually have to agree with you on that one. Now, first off, I would say, like, this makes total sense as to why you would love this game, because, like, I think people who like Pokemon will really like this game. Like, I think that's, like, it's one of the best Pokemon-like games not made by Nintendo that's out there.
Definitely.
So I definitely think it's a game worth playing. I actually played this one on an Extra Life stream a long time ago, because that was back when, you know, I think Kind of Funny had just started, and they were doing, you know, Team Kind of Funny for Extra Life, and they would host you on the Kind of Funny, Twitch channel. So I was on there for like 2 hours playing World of Final Fantasy, because I was around when World of Final Fantasy came out. Like, I remember that memory vividly, and just having a great time, you know, interacting with some chat members. That was also met Fiona McKinnon, friend of the show, for the first time.
Oh, that's so cool.
So yeah, it was just that's a really interesting memory that I have tied to that game, because I just remember, you know, playing it and I'm really enjoying it when it came out, and I haven't really played it since. I know that they also did a re-release of it called World of Final Fantasy Maxima, which I think has some additional content. And that's the version you buy now. I don't think you can buy it unless you buy a physical copy of the original version. But it's got some extra goodies in it anyway, so I don't see why you would want to go back and buy the original version anyways. But that's a good pick, Garrett. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's also when you're right, that people just kind of like played it, I think, the week it came out. Well, very few people did, and they just kind of forgot about it from there.
Yeah, and there's the Maxima, and people like it, and it's like still being ported out, so it's not like trapped behind a system, which is good.
Yeah,
it's just you're right. I don't think a lot of people really knew what this game was, other than being, oh, it's a Final Fantasy fan servicey side game.
Yeah,
and then everyone's like, oh, let's not worry about it. Let's just go to a different game. But I thought it was pretty fun for sure.
Nice. Well, next up, Garrett, I have to go to the game that is on the thumbnail that apparently was the game that summoned Seth Sturgill to the live stream tonight, and that is Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood for the Nintendo DS. This is a BioWare game. So Sega decided to bring in BioWare and this game came out on September 30th, 2008. This game was directed by Mark Dara, who was the executive producer on pretty much every single Dragon Age game that came out, as well as Anthem.
That's awesome.
And not only that, but a lot of the team members who worked on this also worked on Dragon Age, and those two projects like Dragon Age Origins and this were kind of being worked on at the same time. And even though this game is a little bit unfinished, like that was a problem when it was reviewed when it first came out. For example, there are certain levels that, you know, a lot of the game has like, you know, very nice music, but there are certain sections of the game that have like MIDI music that's very poor that is not supposed to be there. But for the most part, this was like a really interesting game because it was a Sonic game with good writing, with great turn-based action, but also it felt true to the Sonic IP in particular. For example, like in some battles, you have to catch up with the enemies. So to do that, you basically go into like a Sonic platforming level that's top down, and then you're collecting rings along the way, and you're trying to catch up to the enemies. And then when you catch up to them, you do like a turn-based battle with them, which is really cool. And then when you're exploring the open environments, it's like an isometric view, and you can select any of the party members that you have. And just like Magic Knight Rayearth, what I just talked about, you can then, when you switch to different characters, they have different abilities, like Tails can fly, for example, so you can get over, you know, certain obstacles that are in your way. Or Amy's got her hammer and she can knock some stuff down. Like it was actually a really cool game, like a really interesting RPG from BioWare. And it's like the long forgotten BioWare game that everyone just forgets that they did, because they did all these, you know, fantastic masterpiece level games like Jade Empire or Knights of the Old Republic or Dragon Age or Mass Effect. And this is definitely not of that caliber, which is also why I think there was a little bit of disappointment for some people, because, you know, when you heard BioWare in their prime was developing their game and it's not a masterpiece or not like a 9 out of 10 game, then you just naturally come away disappointed. But this game is really good. Is actually a good interpretation of what the world of Sonic would be in an RPG. So that's one of the things I like about it. As a Sonic fan, I actually think that Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood is actually a pretty good game, and definitely a worthy pickup on your DS, provided you know you don't want to, you know, unless of course you don't like Sonic, you know. It's hard to get into this game, obviously, if you don't like Sonic. But I think for Sonic fans, if you haven't played this before, I think it's definitely worth checking out as well. So there you go. Thoughts. I need to know. I need to know what you're thinking right now.
A Sonic RPG on the Nintendo DS.
Yep.
Developed by BioWare. If you would have told me that when I was like, I don't know, like drunk, like, you know, 5 drinks in, I would be just laughing at you. Just like, you're joking. Why are you joking about this? And then I looked it up and it's just like, yeah, no, that's a true thing.
In fact, even like when you boot up the game, it has like a full motion video of like the BioWare logo when it rotates, just like in all the other BioWare games that came around there. Just to remind you, this is made by BioWare. And also what was interesting about when this came out too is that was still around the time when BioWare was only making games for Xbox and not, you know,
that's true.
Like this was around the time that like this game came out, I think just after the EA acquisition of BioWare. So EA's logo isn't even on the game or anything like that, which is interesting. But
yeah, no, that's super interesting. I saw some gameplay of this and it's like, okay, it looks like a DS role-playing game. It actually looks kind of cool. Like the bottom screen, I don't know, like it's an isometric view, and then there's some like height differences. It was actually kind of hard to figure out. Maybe I just have to play it in order to understand it. But overall it looked fine. And I'm like, okay, this is a Sonic role-playing game that's made by BioWare. And it's like, I definitely need a it's so weird that I want to try it out. Yeah. Like, I'm not a Sonic fan. You know me. I don't care about Sonic, but it's a role-playing game, a BioWare game. I got to try it out. Like this seems too cool. Seems too weird not to do it.
Yeah. And this one is another one in the camp of what you talked about with Etrian Odyssey, because of the way the game's designed. Like with the top and bottom screen. I don't think it'll ever get re-released, which makes me really sad because this is a game I think would have been awesome to eventually come to another platform. Right? I'm kind of sad that this one never came to Wii U Virtual Console because Wii U does have Virtual Console for DS games, and I think this would have been awesome to play on Virtual Console on Wii U even. But alas, this is another game that unfortunately is just trapped on the console that it's on.
Like coming on,
and they'll probably never come back, which makes me sad. But
yeah, BioWare it's not coming back. Yeah, wouldn't it be so cool? Just think of a world where BioWare had a side studio, a side hustle, just making DS 3DS RPGs. That would have been a weird timeline.
Yeah, imagine if this would have caught on. Like if this was like super popular and then we got like 3 or 4 more of these, Garrett. That would have been
of Sonic ones, and then I'll go across the Sega IP and just have fun.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Or
that would have been cool.
What if BioWare, like if they did a good job with this one, everyone bought this one because this was a game famously that just didn't sell very well, and that's why we never got a sequel to it. But imagine, Garrett, if then they had a chance to do something like Shining Force or Phantasy Star. Like, oh man,
yeah,
I'm just salivating at the mouth just like thinking about that or fantasizing about that. Like that would be amazing.
So, I'm wondering why it didn't sell well. I think it's just there was a lot of DS games that came out, and it's like there's the gems in there, but then there's a lot of side where like kind of shovelware type of games. I know Sonic is not one of those like lower tier games, but it's one of those like you think just like World of Final Fantasy. Oh, it's another side Sonic game.
Yeah.
The Sonic fans are not going to be into it as much. Other people are not going to be familiar with it. Oh, it's a Sonic game. Not going to be into it as much.
This was also like the down period for Sonic 2. You have to remember, like this was when like Sonic was probably at his least popular phase was at this point. Like, especially like this was only a couple of years after Sonic 06 came out, or Sonic and the Secret Rings and stuff. You got stuff like that from Sonic, and it just not a lot of good from the world of Sonic around when this came out. Where Sonic really saw his rise again when Sonic Generations came out later in the 360 life cycle. So there you go. I had to include that here as well, because it's just, again, very silly. And the fact that most people don't even remember that game is, kind of crazy to think about. Like it's the BioWare game that everyone forgets ever existed. But I'll move on because I know I'll go through the rest of my list here, Garrett, because some of these are out here and a lot of these are honorable mentions, so I won't stick on them for too long. But I do have to bring up Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals on the Super Nintendo. This game is amazing. It is one of my favorite Super Nintendo games. It was developed by Netherlands Studios and published by Natsume here in North America. But originally it was published by Taito in Japan. And Taito did the first game, Lufia and the Fortress of Doom. This is a prequel to Luffy and the Fortress of Doom, and it's about the 4 heroes that save the world from the Sinistrals that you play as at the beginning of Lufia and the Fortress of Doom. But it's just a really awesome turn-based RPG with a really great story, some great writing, some interesting characters, and kind of like a sad kind of ending to it that was very uncharacteristic for a lot of games that came out around the era that it came out. But I love Lufia 2. And the main reason why I think people just don't talk about it, or people missed out on this one, was because this game came out in 1996 on the Super Nintendo, which was like the year before Final Fantasy VII came out. But also, like, this was one of the 20 last North American Super Nintendo games. Like, it came out the same year as Donkey Kong Country 3. And then there was like Kirby's Dreamland 3, which came out the next year. But for the most part, you didn't really have a lot of people buying new Super Nintendo games in 1996. Like, a lot of people had kind of moved on to the N64, because you have to remember also this was the year the N64 came out. So it's just
1996, really? Oh my gosh. Yeah. I didn't even realize that. Wow. Yeah. Okay, cool.
So it's just like, there was a lot of stuff working against this game as to why, people kind of slept on this one, but also a lot of people slept on the first Lufia, which I think is also a really good game too. And the Lufia series is, existent on a bunch of other platforms. I'm kind of saving a little bit of my talk about it too, because I do want to do an episode about the Lufia games with a special guest at some point. So I'm going to kind of hold my talk for then. But Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinister is one of my favorite Super Nintendo RPGs and a fantastic game all around. I talked about that a little bit more too on the tier list that I did over the Christmas break of my favorite Super Nintendo RPGs. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
There you go. But then my honorable mentions, so that was my 5 picks that I wanted to bring in, but then I had 5 honorable mentions. I'm going to start with Ghost Lion on the NES. Garrett, I want you to do something while I explain this. Go to Google and search for Ghost Lion box art. I want you to look at the box art while I talk about this game.
No.
So
what does this look like?
This game was developed by Kemco and released on the NES in 1992. And you basically play a girl named Maria whose family is attacked by this lion that's like a spectral lion. It's basically like a ghost lion, as you will, by the title of the game. And after the ghost lion attacks the village, her parents decide, okay, we're going to go and track down this lion and kind of figure out why this ghost lion attacked our town. But they never come back. So Maria decides that she's going to go and track down the ghost lion, but this leads her to falling into a fantasy world. So it's kind of like an isekai anime where she's traveling to a fantasy world where ghost lions exist or other fantasy like creatures exist, but otherwise it's just a really good, fun turn-based RPG, and it's of all of the all of the NES RPGs, it's definitely the one I definitely hear people talk about the least, and it's really fun. So it's also a game that used to be very expensive. But Garrett, now that I've given you a second, have you looked at the box art for this game? Because it's interesting.
I have. Wow. I'm glad that you have this subject to bring out games like this, because I'm looking at this box art, and this is exactly I would picture I would say low to mid 20s 1990s girl or woman would look like, and then you just have this albino white
so to describe it, the girl in question is wearing like a white tank top with like green leggings and like the craziest like 80s bullet hair, and she's got a sword somehow, and then
literally like a lion mane, like no joke,
and she's sitting next to the ghost lion, like this like white lion, and like there's of course the most 80s sun in the background with this like very 80s font. Yeah. Oh my god, it's so good.
Yeah, that's a cover art. If I, was, a child back in the day, I would probably look at that cover. I was like, you know what? I'm going to get this and see what this is like. I think box art went a long way back in the day. Like,
Well, it was the only way you could really sell your game in a lot of ways. Because, I mean, back then, you didn't have the internet, and not everyone had a subscription to Nintendo Power, or even not everyone had friends that had NESs. So in order to learn about a game or to find out about a game, like you would go to a store and look at the back of the box, and that would be all the information you'd have to work with. Or you'd see it in like the Sears catalog that you'd get for Christmas time and be like, oh, there's like a 2-word, like a 2-sentence description of this game. And it's like in the Sears catalog, it's like, you fight a ghost lion in this game. It's like, cool. Like I got that from the title, I guess. But yeah, so
that's a box art for sure. Wow.
Very silly box art, which probably turns some people away, but the game's really fun. And it's definitely a game that not many people talk about. It's also very expensive too. So it does have that going for it, but it has definitely been coming down in price as far as expensiveness. So it's definitely more attainable now than it used to be. But I'm going to move on to a game that you can actually play now for $10 if you've got a PlayStation 3, because this is a PlayStation 2 backwards compatible game, and that is Stella Deus. This is developed and published by Atlas, and it released on April 26, 2005. It's a strategy RPG. It's really fun. It's a game that I would love to do kind of like a deeper dive one day. But it's a really good Atlas strategy RPG that's not Shin Megami Tensei related. It's not Persona related.
Right.
It's something completely different from those franchises. And it's very different from a lot of games we get from Atlas. But still, like, when you look at the cover and look at the character portraits in the game, like, you can definitely tell they use, like, kind of the same artists they use for the Shin Megami Tensei games to draw the characters and stuff like that. But it's a game that I think a lot of people missed as well because it had kind of a lower print run on the PlayStation 2. And it got reamed in reviews because it had some really bad voice acting. But nowadays, if you go in with the mindset and with the mindset of, oh, I'm going in knowing that the voice acting is very cheesy, I think you're going to have a really good time with it because the strategy RPG combat is really good in this game. And the story is pretty good too. So Stella Deus is a game that I know a lot of people missed, but it's on the PlayStation Store right now for your PlayStation 3. You can get it for $10, or maybe it'll come to PlayStation Plus at some point because they've already ported it at this point. So maybe it joins the PS2 lineup at some point on PlayStation.
That would be nice. I saw some gameplay of this. It got me intrigued. I was like, dang. Yeah. I really, looking at these games, I really missed some stuff. I really missed RPGs like before that. 2010 really is that year. Yeah. I think it was 2009, 2010 is when I really got more into it. But
that's very much the theme of my list, Garrett. It's all just all before 2010 stuff. And in fact, I don't have any other PS2 games on my list except for one more at the end, which is also on the Wii. But like the PS2 in particular, you can do a whole list like this because there was like so many games released for the PlayStation 2. And there's a lot of forgotten RPGs on the PlayStation 2 because there were just so many of them. Like it was like the RPG console of that generation. So just kind of like the Switch is now. So, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I would argue with PS4, PS5, I guess. But yeah, Switch is like, it's hunkering with a lot of role-playing games, a lot of porting going on, which is good. And of course, the handheld form factor.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
Exactly. Well, next up, a game that is actually going to become more accessible later this year, Rhapsody, a musical adventure. I talked about this one a little bit on the show before. This is a PlayStation 1 game. It was developed by NIS and published in North America on July 30th, 2000. And it's a strategy RPG that's also a musical at the same time. So it's your typical strategy RPG fare, and it's made by NIS, and we know that they make, good strategy role-playing games for the most part. And it's kind of silly in tone, but not as silly as something like Disgaea, and it's not as over the top as something like Disgaea.
Oh, cool.
So, but there are certain sections of the game where the game just breaks into musical numbers because it's a musical. So it's not very often that we talk about games that are musicals on any show, let alone this show. But Rhapsody, a musical venture, is actually a really good strategy role-playing game as well. Again, a lot of good strategy role-playing games that have been forgotten, and this is definitely one of them. And it's coming later this year in the NIS Collection 3 that's coming out later this year. The Pretty Presents one. And it's a good RPG, so definitely you'll have to check that out on Switch later this year. But that's a really good one as well. And then kind of to round out my last two, I'll breeze through these quickly because we talked about them before on the show. Popful Mail for the Sega CD. This one was another Working Designs game. It was a Neon Falcom game. It's a really good action RPG, side-scrolling, kind of plays like a Zelda game, more like Zelda 2, but it controls a lot better than Zelda 2. It's got some great cutscenes, great voice acting, and just a really like goofy fantasy game that kind of reminded me of like the anime, the Slayers, if y'all know anime out there. That's a really good example. Or something like Konosuba is like another game that is kind of another anime that is very similar to as well. But last one is the other visual aid that I've got here. Sakura Wars, So Long My Love. This takes place in 1920s New York, and it's got steampunk mechs in it. And it's also a really fantastic strategy role-playing game. I love the Sakura Wars games. I wish we had more of them in North America, but we only have two. We've got this one and then the reboot that came out in 2020. But I think Sakura Wars, So Long My Love on the Wii and the PS2 is also a fantastic game as well. Well, now that we've gone through all these games, Garrett, we now have more to go through.
So many.
Because thanks to our community members for diving into this week, because we asked you, the listeners and the viewers, what some of your favorite forgotten RPGs were. And again, huge shout out to everyone who wrote in tonight. We got a lot of them to go through. So
we got a lot of people that,
I think
wanted
this
to
is probably
explain,
our most written in topic before out of anyone
sure.
we've done before. But
absolutely.
So we're going to start with the Muffin Mod, aka Kevin Ainsworth. And he said, one of my favorite forgotten RPGs is Yu-Gi-Oh! The False Bound Kingdom, which again goes back to our card battling episode not too long ago.
That's true.
Instead of the traditional card games, it switches the formula up by turning it into a real-time strategy RPG where you control different units and engage in turn-based strategic combat. Critically, not very well received, but a game I loved back on the GameCube. So again, more GameCube games, Garrett. But this to me sounds like, and I was looking up footage of this earlier because I remember seeing stuff about this game, but I didn't remember what kind of game it was.
Me too.
This kind of reminds me of something like the Dealfold Chronicles, which is just fresh on my mind because I just played the demo for it. So it looks like if you like the Dealfold Chronicles, you'll probably like this game as well. But it also looks very different from every other Yu-Gi-Oh game that's out there. But
do you want to guess the Metacritic score range?
I think it's in the low 60s the last time I looked, but I could be wrong.
I mean, this says 44.
Ooh, even better.
And it is mainly bogged down by IGN. Gave it a 3.5. GameSpot,
oh my god,
at the time gave it a 3.1. So some people did not like this. I think it really got hampered down because it's a real-time strategy game with the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise. Like,
yeah,
whew. You got to be bold. And it was Konami. Konami developed this, so they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
But
Konami develops all the Yu-Gi-Oh games. So that's not too surprising.
That's true.
But you're right. Like I think they wanted to do something different with the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, and they learned from this and to not do anything different by it.
I remember this cover art though exactly. I don't think I ever wanted it. I don't know why, but I.
Well, it was on GameCube, Garrett. I don't think you ever had a GameCube, right?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, you did. Oh,
I had an SNES all the way up to, well, except for Wii U, all the way to Switch. I had a GameCube. I played a lot of it, and I remember seeing this one in the game shelf. I think I was still more into the card games, and I did not know what this particular game was.
Yeah.
So maybe
I think I see this game like every time I go to my retro game store, and so at some point maybe I need to play this game at some point, but maybe not with those reviews, but we'll see.
Maybe not. Oh my goodness.
Good Lord. Although you never know, because reviews at the time were kind of like all over the place too. Like during that era of games, like reviews were very inconsistent. So we'll see.
I think reviewers' expectation of a Yu-Gi-Oh game too, it's like, this is a card game. It's like, nope, it's not a card game at all. So of course they might give it a lower score just because of that bias as well.
Exactly. Well, next up we got Andrew Semachek, who says, it's not a question, but Lunar Silver Star story is so good and sadly forgotten. I should have bought it back on the PSP when I had the chance. Well, I mean, Andrew, I don't know if you knew this, but if you have a PlayStation Vita, you can buy the game on the PlayStation Vita because it is backwards compatible with the PlayStation Vita. So you can actually play it on there. It's on the store. I think it's like 10 or 20 bucks digitally. But the physical copies have like skyrocketed in price for that game. That's the PSP port of Lunar from Sega CD that, of course, Garrett has to hear me talk about all the time. That's on my shelf behind me.
Of course.
But yeah, that game's really good. But also, if you want to play that version as well, that version is also available on iOS and Android if you've got a tablet to play it with. And that version's pretty good too. So there you go. Next up.
Come on, Andrew. It's only $230. Like, come on.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine, Garrett. It's fine. I mean, that's not as expensive as the Sega CD version. Like, that's way more expensive. But moving on, Skycatcher Gaming says, Fire Emblem Blazing Blade seems forgotten. I haven't heard too much about it for the last couple of years. Pretty much the Fire Emblem GBA through Wii eras, we don't really hear about much. I mean, I think we still hear... True. We hear a lot of people still talk about Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn.
Yes.
But not the GBA games. I agree with him on the GBA games. Most people don't talk about those games, whether it's, the remake of Fire Emblem that's on there, or Sacred Stones, or Blazing Blade. I don't think we hear too much about them. But Garrett, what do you think?
No, I definitely agree with you. I think I have One of the no wait, I have one of the GBA Fire Emblem games on because it was the one part of the ambassadors
Yeah,
program.
that's
in
Sacred
3DS.
Stones was the one that was included with it.
Sacred Stone. So I have that one.
Mhm.
I don't think I've heard of Blazing Blade either. So
Yeah. I have them
I haven't
because they were on the
because
Wii U virtual console for GBA, so you can buy them all there for $10.
oh well, okay, cool.
Yeah, they play on your TV and they play great because actually, like, the Wii U is actually like a pretty good console to play GBA games on, actually. But
I'm sure.
yeah,
I
next
wish
up,
Switch was, but it's not.
if only, Garrett. Maybe
If
one
only.
day, maybe one day we'll get there.
Maybe one day.
Next up, we got Quagmire, who says, Batten Kaidos is the only card RPG I've ever liked. It's pretty niche in that regard, but I loved it before I realized who Monolith Soft even was. And I mean, we got another card battling game on here, Garrett, even though
Another card battling game.
we talked about this one on the card episode because we both actually were like, we had forgotten that Batten Kaidos was a thing and didn't include it on any of our lists. But yeah, Batten Kaidos, really cool. I don't actually own those games either, and they're very expensive now too. So just more games,
want to play them.
More expensive games to throw in the pile. And then we got a couple of entries from Twitter. Barry Carenza at Hawk Hellfire. He says, so many great RPGs that have been forgotten. One of my favorites growing up was Seventh Saga. I rarely hear anyone ever talk about this game. And you're right, Barry. I personally never really hear anyone talk about Seventh Saga, which was a Super Nintendo RPG from Enix. So not Square Enix, but just Enix before they merged with Square. But it's another turn-based RPG on the Super Nintendo. It made good use of the Mode 7 graphics on the Super Nintendo, with some interesting, visual perspectives and looks at your characters and the combat. But it's a game I never really beat or put too much significant time into. I just remember playing it on an emulator and having a fun enough time, but I didn't ever sink too much time into this one. Whereas Garrett, I don't think you've ever heard of this game, right?
Nope, never heard of it. Sorry.
Long forgotten. All right, next up, we got Adam Sandoval at Anime Gaming Lift, and he says, my favorite forgotten RPG is definitely Legend of Legaia. Absolutely criminal that the series didn't continue after Legaia 2. So that's actually a PlayStation 1 game, and it's a game I've never played. I've seen it on store shelves a bajillion times. I remember my brother Kyle was telling me that for one of my birthdays, he was actually going to get me for my birthday because he saw it on the shelf, but he got me a different PS1 game instead. I think it was Final Fantasy 9 or it was something different. I can't remember exactly which one. But he was pretty close to getting me that one instead. So it's a game I almost had in my possession, but I've never actually owned Legend of Legaia or never played it. So I don't have too much to say about it.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. Ooh.
That's one of the classic RPGs. So, but yeah, you're right, Adam. There's no, actually, I don't think there is a way for current consoles to play it other than hopefully eventually PS Plus.
Well, actually, I think it was on PlayStation 3 as a PS1 classic, which would then make it available on PlayStation Vita as well, Garrett. So
yeah, so there you go. That's the extent. That's the reach.
There's your avenue.
Vita and PS3.
Yeah. In fact, you'd be surprised how many good like PS1 RPGs are on Vita and PlayStation 3 from the PS1 era. But next up, we got Blaze Knight with a whole bunch of stuff. Forgotten RPGs for me. Nostalgia, Final Fantasy, the Four Heroes of Light both come to mind for me. But easily my favorite forgotten RPG of all time is Jade Cocoon, which is a PlayStation 1 game. Literally never heard anyone talk about this monster collecting RPG and its monster fuse mechanic, the ability to fight as your player character, a great story, all wrapped in a fantastic world. That is a list of games that I totally forgot even existed until I saw Blaze Knight's response in Discord today. Especially Nostalgia in particular, because I remember, because that was a Nintendo DS game, and that was, before Bravely Default came out, and it was, people kept saying, well, why doesn't anyone make, old school Final Fantasy style games anymore? And Nostalgia was that game, was trying to be that game that was like old school Final Fantasy games, just like, Final Fantasy, the Four Warriors of Light, also a Nintendo DS game as well, and also a game I totally forgot even existed. but it's another turn-based game as well. And then Jade Cocoon, it's about insects, and I don't know much about that game other than the fact that I've heard other people mention the name, and I literally know nothing about it. Whereas I think I totally stumped you on this.
Story of Tamamayu. Well, the way you describe it, Blaze Knight, that sounds like a game I'll be into. So I'll definitely keep my eye out
doing this.
For that
I'm just shoveling more games onto the Garret Bland RPG pile. We need to.
This is a great episode because you're revealing so many old role-playing games that sounds super dope, even though the reviews were kind of like middling on a lot of these, but they sound so good when you explain them. And when people out there explain them, Jade Cocoon's one of them. Is like a monster collecting, a role-playing game, and you can fuse them. Sign me up. I'm so down.
That does sound like a very Garret Bland game, actually, now that you describe it that way.
I love it. I love it so much.
Next up, we got Grouchy Surge, who says Planescape Torment doesn't get enough love anymore. And I think he's onto something, because Planescape Torment was a PC isometric like CRPG, kind of like similar to something in Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale, that a lot of people used to talk about a lot. Like, people used to really love to talk about Planescape Torment, but I don't hear anyone talk about that game anymore. So I think Grouchy Surge is onto something with this one, because it's a beloved game.
I think he's onto something because it is on Switch. Yeah. No one probably ever buys it or plays it, but it definitely is on Switch.
I think it's actually on every platform, because I think when they I can't remember which company was doing the porting, but they ported all the Baldur's Gate games and the Icewind Dale games and Planescape Torment all at the same time. Like they came to everything. Like, they're on Xbox and PlayStation and Switch as well. But
wow.
I think just a lot of people just, I think that's
it's on era, PS4 and Xbox One as well. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Like, I think that's an era of games that for PC role-playing games that, like, people talked about so highly at the time, and those games reviewed very, very well. But
this game, RPG of the year, like on a lot, like GameSpot, IGN, Eurogamer. You're seeing game of the year, game of the month, game of all time, 2005. Jeez. Yeah, no, this game has a lot of accolades for sure.
Yeah. It got a huge pedigree behind it. But yeah, just like I said, most people just don't talk about a lot of those beloved CRPGs anymore, unfortunately, because I think like that genre has fallen out of favor with people, unless it's Divinity, Original Sin, or Pillars of Eternity. I think those are the only ones we really hear too much about nowadays. But moving on.
So Planescape Torment was upgraded and created by Beamdog. That's the studio.
Okay.
And Beamdog is now, it's Idea Sparks Labs, and it was a Canadian game developer founded by a BioWare co-founder.
There you
go. Interesting.
Yeah. All right. Next up, I've got a jab specifically at Garret Bland on this one. So
oh no.
Please get excited. This comes to us from Yarden Angel, who says, this game is the complete opposite of Forgotten, but I think Garret may have still forgotten about it, and I couldn't resist the opportunity to remind him. Garret, play Final Fantasy VI. He probably will say, it's in my backlog, and all I have to say is, I hope he's enjoying Golden Sun. Good Lord.
Listen, fool. Where's the pixel remasters on Switch? Like, come on. Where's the pixel remasters?
Oh,
that's all I'm saying.
I forgot to put it on the doc, but Awesome Dave said the best Forgotten RPG is the pixel remasters, because we don't have them yet.
Because we don't have them yet.
Yeah.
Sorry, Awesome Dave. But yeah, you're totally right. Pixel remasters, where are you? You're not on consoles. You're not on Switch.
I feel like
Yarden, that's my justification.
I feel like, Garret, we talk about the pixel remasters enough on this show. They'll just be willed into existence, and they'll come to consoles at some point, It's just natural.
I hope. Yeah. I hope you're enjoying Golden Sun. Man, Ryan, I need to tell you, like, am I like broken or something? Golden Sun is like, I don't know. Like, I guess I need to play more.
You're not enjoying it, or you're getting stuck? What's the where?
Well, I'm looking up guides to not get stuck.
Oh, okay.
Like, that's fine. But it's just I think the one thing that really bugs me about this game is just I feel like there's no strategy behind it.
Yeah.
There is really, like, I maybe it's more of a story driven game, and I guess I haven't hit really much of the story beats yet. In this one, but the battling it's just the random encounters plus no strategy. I'm just kind of flat on
well, especially too, like the
right
Jin system is like it's not like super in depth or anything like that. Like, it's definitely I agree with you in the sense that I think the gameplay variety is definitely much worse than Camelot's other games, because I do think they did a much better job with the Shining Force games in progressing like the different enemies and combat encounters that you would do in those games versus Golden Sun. And I like Golden Sun more for kind of the story, the aesthetic. I love the music in Golden Sun. Like that's more of this thing I like about it. And also too, I don't know if you'll ever get around to it, but Golden Sun has a second game called The Lost Age, which is a direct sequel to the first one. And it pretty much, they're kind of like two halves of the same game, but you play as different party members in this, in that one. And it's like the story in that one, I think is like even better than in the original Golden Sun 2.
Okay.
So
I think I hit the major beginning part, and now I kind of get back into it sometimes just to do a play session. And it's like, all right, let me get through an hour or so. And it's just like, oh boy, random encounters. I'm going through. I just did the tree dungeon one where I beat Tret or whatever, the major boss there. So now I'm going to the Billabong Cave, like northwest.
I know where you are.
So going up.
That's not that. That's not bad. But anyways, last question, which actually had a question in including an RPG. This comes to us from Nagachaka, who says, my favorite forgotten RPG is Shadow Hearts Covenant for the PlayStation 2, which is a game I've talked about before. Nobody knows what I'm talking about when I'm gushing about this game's Judgment Ring and combo system and dark setting. That's the game I talked about before. That's like in a fantasy version of like, gangster 1920s stuff with, you have Tommy guns in that game. And it's like, nice. It feels like a real like Al Capone kind of story with like a fantasy twist to it. And it's a game series that, again, I think it's just a lot of people missed out on, especially Covenant in particular, because that one came out really late in the PS2 lifecycle when the PS3 was actually out at that time. So I think a lot of people just kind of brushed over it. It also came out the same year God of War 2 came out on the PlayStation 2, which was also like diverted kind of all of its attention away from, Shadow Hearts. So I think a lot of people missed that game, but that game's awesome. I would love to maybe talk about that one at some point. Maybe I need to reach out to Nagachaka. Maybe he needs to come on the show so we can talk some Shadow Hearts on the show. I think that'd be really fun. And then Nagachaka had a question, as I mentioned, and he asked, after we finish Nintendo's best game of 2022, what games would you recommend to fill the void that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 will leave in our RPG-loving hearts? Or is this just a futile attempt, and as gamers, we shouldn't even try to replicate the same exact experiences? So, first of all, Garrett, what game does Nagachaka play after the game of the year, that being Xenoblade Chronicles 3?
Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I don't know. I'm still in the middle of this one, so I can't relate to Nagachaka right now because I know it just gets better and better. But man, what I play with it, Ryan, it's so good. It's like really, it captures my like the story of it just really captures me for sure. Very suspenseful, masterful writing, and presentation of a game. I haven't seen anything like this in a long time, I think. So I don't know. Play Persona 5.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think that'll get close. Play Last of Us. That'll be as emotional and suspenseful, even though it's not an RPG. I think it's up that level. Yeah, I don't know what else can be better in terms of writing right now, because I think it's really like that really high tier of games that I don't think a lot of games hit.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, anyways. I still have to check it out. It's on my list to play before the end of the year. I'm just, eagerly waiting for Soul Hackers 2 to come in another, 2 weeks from now.
I understand, man. It's a time sink, Xenoblade is a huge time sink.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'll get to what I'm able to. But I mean, number one, Nagachaka, we gave you a bajillion games to check out tonight. If you haven't heard of one of our games tonight that we mentioned, or one of the games that the community suggested, maybe that's the place you go to. Like if you want to try out a CRPG, like Planescape Torments, I think is a good one. that was mentioned a little bit earlier, or anything else that we talked about tonight, or just wait for Rhapsody: A Musical Adventure to come to Switch later this year and play that because it's a fun game and it's a musical.
There you go.
Yeah,
you break out in music on your Switch.
Yeah. Also, before we go, because that rounds out all of the community suggestions, I'm gonna bring in this community suggestion from the chat.
Cool.
From Seth Sturgill, who actually brings in Eternal Sonata, is also a game that I really dug, and I feel like I don't hear any folks talk about that game. Yes, Seth, Eternal Sonata, the game where you play as Frederick Chopin, his fever dream, you go into a fantasy world while he's on his deathbed, and that game's amazing. That's one of the best RPGs on 360. So yes, I'm very glad that you decided to throw that in there, Seth, as well. I think we talked about it on an earlier episode as well. So I won't, yammer on too much about that, but I think that's going to do it, Garrett, for Forgotten RPGs Definitely. Episode. A lot to dissect tonight, but I hope everyone had a good episode. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can follow me on Twitter @BlindExplosion. You can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network. We're live each and every Thursday night over at twitch.tv/PSVG. Normally around 7:15 Pacific time, 10:15 Eastern time. And we release on YouTube and all the podcast services, Apple, Google, Spotify. So check that out. And maybe I did tease an image. I got an Elgato capture. It is connected to my Switch. So maybe possibly sometime this month, I will start some streaming.
That's awesome.
On my spare time.
Oh, we're going to have to go check that out. Well, as for me, you can find me on Twitter @Ryan Turford. You also might find me over on twitch.tv/PSVG a little bit later this week on PSVG on Wednesday, where I think Donnie Reese and I are going to talk about PlayStation 2 games on Wednesday. So you might have to go check that out Wednesday night. You can also find us right here on YouTube at youtube.com/carpoolgaming, on Patreon at patreon.com/carpoolgaming, on Twitter @carpoolgaming, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been level 60 of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.